Welcome to The Pilot Life, the show where we sit down with people who are passionate about aviation. My name is Brendan. I've been a commercial airline pilot for over 20 years, and in that time, I've heard some incredible stories. This is a show that I share those with you. Welcome on board. All right, welcome back to the Pilot Life podcast. Good to have you here in the Hawaiian headquarters with none other than Joe Sprague. Joe is a fellow pilot, commercial, multi, all that?
Yep. CFI.
Okay.
Float rating.
Excellent. And more recently, currently the CEO of Hawaiian Airlines. So thank you so much for inviting us into. This is the boardroom?
It's the boardroom for here at the Hawaiian Airlines corporate office. Koapaka is the nickname for this location. And
Outstanding.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here. Thanks.
Outstanding. I know you were born in Wyoming. Is that right?
Yeah. My dad worked for the Forest Service, and he was the ranger in the Teton Ranger District for one of the national forests there. So we lived in Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Oh my gosh. I love it there.
Yeah,
isn't it beautiful there?
Spectacular.
What was your childhood like then there?
So my dad got transferred, every few years as part of his Forest Service career. So we moved a few years, a little bit like a military family. We moved from Idaho, first Jackson Hole to Idaho, and then to Salt Lake City, Utah, Northern California. And then he got stationed in the national headquarter office for the Forest Service. So I spent my high school years in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
And that was sort of a transformative experience. I loved the West. I still do. And I can't imagine living anywhere, except maybe here in the islands, anywhere else except in the Western United States. But living in D.C. for a few years was a good experience and eye-opening in a lot of different ways. And then I went to college at Embry-Riddle in Daytona, and as I was being driven down by my parents to start my freshman year, he found out that he had been transferred to Juneau, Alaska. And that was my real introduction to state of Alaska, Alaska Airlines, and so forth. So I don't think at that point I could have found Juneau on a map, but they ended up moving up there. I ended up spending all my college summer and Christmas breaks there, and just fell in love with the place and some of the rest of its history.
When did aviation kind of first start to creep into your mind?
Pre-memory, probably, honestly. My parents got me a toy airplane that I could ride around the living room on when I was 2 years old, and I still see pictures of that. And I don't know if that sparked something or what, but literally as far back as I can remember, I used to get just excited to go to the airport. That was always in my heart and in my mind. And when I got into high school and started thinking about careers, there really wasn't anything else to think about.
That rings very true with me, because I remember all through high school just going out and parking at the airport.
Sure.
And just watching airplanes take off and land and looking at the lights on the taxiway thinking, why are those green and why are those blue? And just very curious about what is all this. So were you going to go to Embry-Riddle then to get your pilot's license?
Yeah. So I started researching, colleges that had aviation programs. Embry-Riddle quickly, surfaced to the top of the list. Sorry to my friends from University of North Dakota. But, what really caught me about Embry-Riddle, it had a great reputation even back in the 80s, but that it was all aviation. And I just thought, man, total immersion in aviation for my college years, that sounds too good to be true. And so that's why I selected Embry-Riddle.
It's a dream there, right?
Yeah.
I went to the Prescott campus and instructed for 2 years there. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful airplanes. Florida, though, you always got jealous of the people in Florida because the weather there was outstanding, and you're on the beach.
Yeah,
right,
close to the beach. It was a little interesting come spring break time, because back then Daytona was a big spring break hangout, and all my high school buddies every year would be coming down for like several weeks at a time. Wanting to bunk on my dorm room floor, and
you're like, I got to study.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Had you done any flying before you went down there?
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
A friend of my dad's that had a 182 took me up and let me touch the controls a little bit, when I was in junior high. And so really not much. So I had not, taken a formal lesson until my first one at Embry-Riddle.
Yeah. If I were to ask you when you were 18 in that car headed to Embry-Riddle, what would your path have looked like?
It might sound corny or maybe hard to believe, but so I got introduced to the state of Alaska during my college years. But long before that, all my family is from Boise, Idaho. And although we moved around a lot, Grandma and Grandpa were always in Boise. That was always sort of home base. And I can remember as a kid going out to the Boise airport, again, excited to go see the airport. And I remember the first time I saw what turned out to be an F-27 with this really cool meatball sort of looking thing painted on the tail.
Yes.
And I thought, now what's the story on this airline? So I started researching it, and of course we're talking about Horizon Air. I literally did high school term papers on Horizon Air. And I was always sort of a regional airline geek. I was an airline geek through and through, but I was sort of a regional airline geek. And so, experiencing Horizon up close, I started to research them, found out that, headquartered in Seattle, but they had been flying to Boise and all over the Pacific Northwest. And I just developed this real affinity for Horizon Air. So to answer your question, I really think once I started getting into flying, I thought, if I could find my way back to the Pacific Northwest and work for Horizon Air, that would be the coolest thing possible.
And you had to research back when researching was actually a thing.
Yeah.
That was not Google.
Going to the library.
What's that? That is diehard. Awesome. So you're did you do any studies when you went to Embry-Riddle, or did your dad get transferred before you even started?
Nope. He got transferred, but I stayed the course.
Oh, you did?
Went
Okay.
to Embry-Riddle and Daytona all 4 years. Would go to Juneau during the summer and Christmas breaks from college, but always back to Daytona, and then ended up going back there a couple years after college to flight instruct. And after the first year of flight instructing, then the little airline in Juneau, which we can talk about, that I had gotten hired during college to work on the ticket counter for, and made some good relationships there. They invited me to come back and fly for them, and so that was my first sort of commercial flying outside of just flight instructing.
Yeah. What was your first solo like?
First solo was at Flagler County Airport in just north of Daytona Beach. It was in, I think, February of about 1987, something like that. It was in a 172. They have such a great program there at Embry-Riddle. You sort of mentally know you're ready, but you can't avoid having the butterflies in your stomach. That first time you give the power to it and there's nobody sitting next to you. But great experience.
Yeah, wonderful. So you graduate 4 years and then you stayed there and instructed for a bit?
I did. Right after graduation, I was eager to sort of see the world. And of course, this was 1990. It was recession. It was the first Gulf War. There was not a lot of hiring happening. And so the only option I had to get out of Daytona, at least initially, was I went to work for an outfit called Nassau Flyers on Long Island, New York. And my very, very first flying job was flying a traffic reporter for a radio station, WALK.
And so for those people who don't know, this is just there's someone sitting beside you in like a Cessna or something, and you're just flying around looking at cars.
Cessna 152 with some interesting audio equipment, sort of like not nearly as sophisticated as what you have, Brendan. But we'd do a 2-hour circuit around the freeways of Western Long Island and up close to Manhattan, and he'd report in every 10 minutes or so to the radio station.
Building up that PIC time, right?
It was a Cessna 152, but we're flying in the traffic pattern at Kennedy Airport, LaGuardia Airport. This was back when the Concorde was still flying, so there was more than once where the Concorde would come in on final approach to Kennedy right in front of us. And so, it was pretty amazing.
So then how does your journey take you back to Juneau?
The second year after I had gotten out of Embry-Riddle after I'd graduated, I went back to Embry-Riddle that first fall after graduation, after I'd flown in New York, flight instructed at Embry-Riddle, continued to build time, and I got to about 1,000 hours of total time. Wow. And that's what the folks in Juneau, Wings of Alaska is the company at the time, they had said, if you get 1,000, we'd love to have you come back and fly for us. Yeah. So I got there that first winter, and true to their word, they said, well, come on up. And so summer of 91, I went up to Juneau to start flying for them.
What were the planes that they had there?
So at the time, it was, they had scheduled air service that they flew around northern southeast Alaska. Juneau was the hub, and they would fly into wheel planes, Cessna 207s, into the towns that had airports. And then they had Cessna 206s on floats and Beavers on floats that they would fly to the villages that did not have airports.
Very cool.
And so the first summer for Wings, I flew Cessna 207s exclusively on the scheduled service. Got furloughed at the end of the summer, which was expected. Went back for another winter of flight instructing at Embry-Riddle, and got my float rating that winter. Yeah. And then back up for another summer of 92, to fly for Wings again. And then that summer I did both 207s and then 206s on floats.
Nice.
And that was amazing.
How was it flying around Juneau for, a kid coming from Florida? It's a vastly different weather system there.
It sure is. The mountains, the weather, it's, on a blue sky day, there is literally no prettier place in the world. You know this.
Yeah,
I've flown in and out of Juneau a bunch. And then there are a lot of days where it's not a blue sky day. And it especially when you're flying, at the time we were flying primarily VFR. And it was, it was a time when scud running was even more of a thing than it probably still is. And there was a balance between trying to get the job done. If you waited until you had a blue sky day, you would hardly ever, fly. So you had to figure out how to do it safely and not push the envelope too much. But it was challenging, no question.
Yeah. Are you still keeping eyes on the airline? Like, is anyone hiring yet? Or
I was actually having a ball flying for Wings that second summer, especially the variety of float plane flying and then doing the wheel plane flying. And I'll just share with you, Brendan. So that second summer, I did have a mishap with flying a 207.
Oh, you did?
And
it happens.
It was one of those situations where I was in a spot with the weather that I shouldn't have been, and did not lead to a good outcome. And the only good that came from it really was that I lived through it.
Yeah.
And that was a valuable learning experience, super humbling. But probably looking back on it, one of those things that at the moment you say, gosh, I really wish that hadn't happened. But, even a few months later and certainly years later, you look back and say that helped to shape who I am. And so that wasn't the worst thing in the world to have happened. It did cause me to reassess, am I going to still be able to pursue my dream of flying for the airlines? And fortunately, after a few months off, I was able to get back to flying and ended up back in the Washington, D.C. area where my parents had been transferred back to again. And just by pure luck, I was working on the front desk of an FBO at Dulles Airport, and Geico Insurance had their corporate jet based at our FBO. And I got to know the pilots and the chief pilot in particular, and he knew my story, including the mishap up in Juneau. And they weren't quite the same hiring standards as an airline at the time. And so he brought me on as a part-time and then ultimately a full-time first officer on the Learjet that they were operating. And so it was a great sort of transition back into flying and a chance then to fly a jet and, fly in a crewed airplane and so forth.
So you get hired, which is great. So now you're getting some turbine SIC time.
You got it.
Which is awesome.
It was really cool flying. I had a couple of fantastic captains that I flew with there. But the flying, like a lot of corporate flying, it's you take off early in the morning. You might fly for an hour. You land somewhere. You go to an FBO, and then you're there. And that the folks that are going to fly back with you aren't due to come back for 8 or 9 hours. But you never know. They might come back sooner. The meetings might end early or whatever. And so you could not stray very far from the FBO. And so it was a situation where after a year or so of that, I thought, do I want to? The flying's fun, but do I want to sort of be sitting around the FBO for the next 20 years or 30 years? And that's when I started to think about maybe something in management, maybe something where I could use a different skill set, but still be in aviation.
Sure. At that point, did you think Horizon, kind of that dream of mine is I'm going to kind of start going down this different path now?
Yeah, I was thinking about Alaska. I was missing the state of Alaska at that point. I was living back in the Washington, D.C. area. I'd met my wife. We'd gotten married. I'd stepped out of flying to go to work for an aviation trade association. And in Washington, D.C., there's trade associations, advocacy groups for everything, including several for different aspects of the aviation industry. And I ended up going to work for the National Air Transportation Association, which is the trade group for Part 135 operators and FBOs. And I had a great boss who was a terrific mentor. And I learned so much about the broader aviation industry. It really opened my eyes that there was so much more going on in aviation than I realized just flying around in a Cessna. And so that was a tremendous experience. I learned a lot about the DC scene, the FAA, how Congress, oversees aviation. I learned a lot of new skills, writing and public speaking and so forth that have served me well over the years. And but I was missing Alaska, and my wife was willing to give it a go up in the state of Alaska, and so that led to the next transition back.
It's funny how sometimes we, especially as young people, we kind of have this vision of this is how we kind of try to map out our lives. And I think maybe that's kind of pushed on kids too. Of you get out of high school, you gotta know where you're going. You got to go to college and figure all this out. And it's such a great lesson that trying multiple things, especially in your 20s or 30s, is a great thing to be able to kind of expand your skill set and see what you're really interested in doing.
Yeah, it is, and you're right that it's a good lesson, Brendan. I when I talk to younger folks, college kids or whatever, a key point of encouragement I share is be open to forks in the road. It's easy when you think you want to be an airline pilot, for instance, to really get going down that path and think that there's nothing else I could ever imagine doing than pursuing this pathway to become an airline pilot. And what I learned is that there is a lot more to aviation than just being an airline pilot. There's a lot of other ways that you can contribute, that you can have an impact. And so sort of staying open to different options. And the thing about aviation, it's a small industry. You get to know a lot of people pretty easily. When I decided to try the Aviation Trade Association, I was sort of thinking, gosh, is this the right move to step away? I mean, I had a good flying job with Geico on the Learjet, and I probably could have gotten into an airline job eventually with that pathway. But I also figured, hey, if I don't like this thing, I can always go back to flying, and then I'll have a new skill set that I can always fall back on. And so I don't know. It is a good lesson to sort of go out and try some new things from time.
Did you ever, when you were working for that Airline Trade Association, when you first started, did you feel like, I don't know what I'm doing here?
Mm-hmm, for sure, yeah. Because it was going into an office. You know, I'd always gone to the airport to go to work, and now I'm at an office miles from the nearest airport. And there was a little bit of a fish out of water feeling for the first few weeks.
You're working for the trade association, and then you decide that you're going to move back to Alaska.
Yeah. So bless my wife for being open to giving it a try. We'd gone to Juneau for our 1-year anniversary to visit friends there. Her first time in Alaska. It was one of those, bluebird kind of, 4 or 5 day stretches where the mountains were out in all their glory. And so we left Juneau after that trip. She said, man, I could absolutely see living here. And I said, okay, we got the hook is set. So then I started looking for career opportunities up there. And again, very fortunate, was able to get a job with what was then called Era Aviation in Anchorage. And this was a job in marketing for Era, but it was a sort of an all-encompassing generalist job. Got to do charter sales and lots of other fun things. But the timing of it was that we started the role in January, and so we moved from Northern Virginia, outside D.C., to Anchorage, Alaska in January. And she got off the airplane, and it was really cold and really snowy. And she says, "This does not look like Juneau over the 4th of July."
It's really dark too.
Very dark. Yeah. So, but anyway, we made that transition, and that was a really good one.
Yeah.
For us.
So, how do you get into marketing if that's not something that you've done?
Yeah. It was interesting because, again, it's fascinating how sometimes pathways reveal themselves. So Era was looking for a marketing director, but Era did a ton of, they did scheduled flying, of course, out of Anchorage. They were a code-share partner with Alaska Airlines at the time. But they did a lot of government contract work as well. And just they had their roots in the oil business up in the state of Alaska. And so, sort of charter flying and contract flying was what they really liked to do. It was guaranteed revenue, and it was good flying. And so the marketing director was less about advertising and sales and promotions, and more about government contracts, being able to fill out an RFP for a smoke jumper contract or a government research contract flying Twin Otters, things like that. So what they really liked on my resume from the Aviation Trade Association, it said government affairs, and they just said, well, if he knows government affairs, he must know about government contracts. Right. That led to the job, honestly. So, but I sort of, it was airline 101 for me. I mean, I did do charter sales and contract RFPs and all that, but I also dug in on advertising and revenue management and how to do promotions for an airline and how to manage the relationship with Alaska Airlines, and all of that was just fantastic learning for me.
Wow! And so Era at the time, so were they were based in Anchorage?
Based in Anchorage, yeah.
Flying around like Dash 8s and
that was the other thing, Brendan. It was just the coolest fleet. So they had 2 Dash 8 100s at the time. They had 9 Twin Otters. They had 5 Convair 580s.
Oh, cool.
All of them doing charter work, but all of them also doing scheduled service.
Yeah.
And then they had a couple of Caravans on a FedEx contract. They had a Lear 35 and a King Air 200 doing the air ambulance contract for Providence Hospital. And then they had the whole helicopter division of the company too. And so it was like aviation smorgasbord.
Yeah.
It was just fantastic.
Love that. Does that job then, or going to Era, does that kind of put you your first exposure with Alaska Airlines and kind of that whole relationship? Is that how that started?
It is. First formal exposure to them. When I was working for Wings of Alaska in the 80s, both when I was working on the ticket counter and then when I was later flying for them, Wings of Alaska had a lot of ties to Alaska Airlines. Bob Jacobson was the founder, but so was Drew Haig, who ended up being an Alaska Airlines captain, of course. Doug Lane, another Alaska Airlines captain, was one of the early key players at Wings of Alaska. Bob's wife, Darlene, worked at the city ticket office at the Baranoff Hotel. And so as I was spending that time in Juneau, I started to realize that there were all these local connections to to Alaska Airlines. And I came to have a real deep appreciation for Alaska Airlines. You don't live in Juneau for any length of time and not have an appreciation for Alaska Airlines. It's the way in or out, but there's so much history there. There's so much connection. Alaska Coastal, of course, and Shell Simmons, and just tons of history, which I'm a airline history geek.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty cool to have some direct connections to some of that. Drew Haig, before he passed away, he used to, come by the ticket counter every time he was in Juneau. And so anyway, that was when I really started to have some affinity for Alaska Airlines that complemented what I already felt for Horizon. So when I got the job with Era, and Era was a great company too, but yeah, it was, to me, it was sort of like playing for AAA and hoping that the major league team would call me at some point.
Yeah, so good. And that's something that you bring up there is community, right? Like Juneau, because I still fly in there, and it's still very much, it feels like a tight-knit group, and kind of that flying that we do, Juneau, Sitka, Yakutat, Cordova, like all Petersburg, Wrangell, they all rely on you. And I feel a deep sense of pride flying into these cities, knowing that this airline keeps this whole thing running, and it's just
keeps the whole region running.
Incredible operation.
Yeah, flying the basketball teams from one high school in one town to a gym in another town. The groceries, the supplies coming in and out. I mean, Alaska Airlines flies to 19 different cities in the state of Alaska, and only 3 of which are connected to any road system. So 16 communities up there that the only way in or out, literally, is Alaska Airlines, and not just for people to come in or out, but oftentimes for the especially the premium consumables. Whether it's groceries or medicine or things of that nature. So it is, you're right, a very, very special role, not just in Southeast Alaska, but throughout the state. Alaska.
I just kind of hear you saying names of people, and that's very much what Alaska pilots do, because someone listening to this will know everyone that you just named.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's a very, very small.
Close-knit.
Yeah. So then how do you get to Alaska Airlines from Era?
Ended up being at Era for about, I guess, 3 or 4 years. And then finally there was and I was getting worried, to be honest with you, Brendan, because I thought, my wife and I had a son at that point. We had another one on the way, and I was sort of thinking, am I getting to a point where I'm not going to be able to go to Alaska, because I might have to take a step back in terms of pay or level of responsibilities and so forth. And I just wasn't sure. A lot of those like director level positions at Alaska, they often went appropriately so to somebody internal, and so I just wondered if I might have missed the opportunity. And then there was an opening for one of the key leadership positions for Alaska Airlines in Anchorage, the regional sales director position. And the previous person had moved on to a new role. And anyway, I applied for it, and I had become a little bit of a known entity because of the work at Era. And so that's what led to that role in 2000 was when I got hired by Alaska Airlines.
It's funny how the work you do that you may think doesn't get noticed gets noticed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, here you are at Era thinking, gosh, maybe my shot is blown here. But if you show up and you do the work every day, people see that.
Absolutely. Yeah. People are paying more attention than you might think.
Yeah.
And you don't need to showboat. You don't need to make a big deal out of things. Just come in, do a good job, and people pay attention.
Yeah.
People see that.
Yeah. Was it similar to what you were doing at Era? Was it kind of the same thing?
It was similar. It was local sales activities for Alaska Airlines, meeting travel agents, working on contracts with school districts and local businesses, from oil companies to mining companies to things of that. Tourism.
Yeah.
We did a lot of the tourism flying around the state, and so that was a big part of it. And then the other cool thing was I got to partner closely with some real legends of Alaska Airlines in the state of Alaska. I mean, a lot of folks know Jim Johnson was the senior VP of Public Affairs. The Petersburg Airport's named after Jim, and he was a fixture in the state of Alaska, sort of community relations world for Alaska Airlines for decades. And the folks that came behind him were Bill McKay and Susan Bramstead, and Bill was involved with bringing me on board Alaska Airlines. He's somebody I had gotten to know a little bit while I was at Era. And then Susan Bramstead was the director of public affairs for the state of Alaska, Anchorage-based. And so she and I partnered on a lot. And they knew the history, they knew the culture, they knew everybody in the state of Alaska. So getting to sort of hang around with Bill and Susan for 3 years that I was in the sales director job was invaluable. It was just amazing because it allowed me to not only see the whole state. That was one of the other cool things. I mean, my job was to go out and fly all over the state of Alaska.
You get to go and fly all through the Arctic.
Exactly. All the Arctic places I hadn't been to before. But then to meet the community leaders, the business leaders, the political leaders from around the state, and at a time, in the early 2000s where, some of the absolute luminaries of the history of the state of Alaska were still in action, Senator Ted Stevens, people like that. And so it was a very special 3 years.
That's some of the work that I think, like as a pilot, I don't see, right? All of these relationships that are built over decades, really, right? Because it's people that have worked at the airline for decades, building up to kind of keep this service coming in.
It's the relationships built up over decades, and it's the sort of the web of those relationships because of the role that Alaska Airlines plays in those small communities. In other places it might have seemed weird for the head of community relations or the sales director to have such close relationships with mayors or things of that nature. But when you're the only way in or out of some of these communities, and you're so intertwined with everything that's going on in the state, it made sense that you would have these connections to all the different state leaders.
So then how long were you in this position, and kind of where does this go?
This was in going into about 2003, and the company Alaska had decided to open up, for the first time ever, its own government affairs office in Washington, D.C. And, at an airline, the CEOs tend to be pretty involved in the public policy work, the government affairs work. And so, Bill had just stepped into being CEO in the spring, early summer of 2003, and he tapped me along with Bill McKay to go open the government affairs office in D.C. He liked that I was a known entity to them, and they knew that I knew a little bit about how things worked inside the Beltway. So in 2003, we moved from Anchorage back to Washington, D.C.
Your wife is a very patient woman, isn't she?
Saint Jen. She's fantastic. But so we took two little kids and headed back to Washington, D.C., knowing that it probably wouldn't be a super long-term assignment. We thought maybe a few years back there to get this DC office going. We sort of ultimately thought and hoped that we would end up in Seattle at the corporate office, but went back, did that for about a year and a half when Bill called one day and said, okay, now it's time to come back to Seattle to the corporate office.
Come back. What was that phone call back for?
It was to come and actually look after the whole public and government affairs department in Seattle. Overseeing not just the DC operation, but state and local government affairs, corporate communications, community relations.
Did you ever see your life taking this path back when you were at Embry-Riddle? I mean, why I'm wondering is because people look at you now and you're the CEO, right? And so they like my brain thinks that, well, he must have always just been on this kind of, leadership track. But then to hear like, no, you kind of made this 180 at some point. You were going down this one way and then kind of went this other way. I mean, were you just taking opportunities as they came?
Yeah, a little bit. I somewhere along the way, I did think that this was Alaska Airlines was where I wanted to spend the rest of my career. Going back to those early days in Juneau before I ever worked for Alaska, but learning about it, learning about the history, learning about the people, learning about the legends, some of which you've interviewed on this podcast, and I sort of had made up my mind that I wanted to be at Alaska Airlines, and I knew I was going to do management stuff, and I wanted to do some things, and that meant I knew ultimately was going to mean leaving Anchorage and ending up in the corporate office in Seattle. But beyond that, I was open, and another key thing that I share with college kids and stuff is have a mentor, find a mentor, ask somebody to be your mentor, or be aware when somebody's offering to serve as a mentor for you, because mentors mean a lot. That they give you wisdom that you might not otherwise get on your own. They can point out opportunities that you might not see on your own. And I was just incredibly blessed to have Bill McKay and really also Bill Air serve as mentors for me. And so, Bill Air, I worked closely with him in the government affairs roles, both in D.C. and then back in Seattle. But he recognized it would be good for me to get some experience in some other areas. And I went from public affairs to in-flight. And there was an opening, and he said, can you go lead the flight attendant group?
Wow.
So that was my first step into something much more operationally focused and leading a frontline work group and so forth.
So how did you jump into that role? Because you didn't have any in-flight experience.
No. It was interesting. It was a lot of learning, a lot of drinking from a fire hose. Again, good mentors and folks around that knew that business. There was a great leadership team in place with the in-flight group already, and they were wonderful to me and helped coach me and help me learn it. And then the flight attendant group, we have outstanding flight attendants at Alaska Airlines, and it was fun to work with them. And I think it was the learning there for me as a leader was like you can't be in a desk. Like they sort of told me, like if you're going to have any sort of success with the in-flight group, you need to be out connecting with the flight attendants. And so I did. I was only in the job a little over a year, but I spent most of that time as much as I could out, connecting with flight attendants, and that. Yeah. I learned a lot from that. The predecessor for me in that role had been very connected with flight attendants, and I always felt like I was hustling to keep up with how he had done it. But that served me well for other jobs, including ultimately the Horizon job, to have had a chance to build some muscle in interacting with frontline employees.
Then you mentioned you ended up at a job at Horizon, so you go from in-flight to.
Yeah, I bounced around again.
Okay.
Some great opportunities. I went from in-flight to cargo. I led our cargo group at Alaska. That was a tremendous experience, sort of a business within the business. And again, much of it state of Alaska related and serving the unique needs of the communities in the state of Alaska. That's what the cargo business at Alaska Airlines is really all about. So that was super special. Then Bill and Brad was coming up at that point, and it was during the job in cargo that I started reporting to Brad Tilden. Mm-hmm. And Bill was getting ready to start to make his exit, and they asked if I would serve as the vice president of marketing, which. Now this was
good thing you had that marketing experience from Aero, right?
Except that was just a pretty small sliver of experience for the role at Alaska. But again, great people, and Brad and Bill, they knew a lot about that role, and they worked closely with me on it. So did that for a few years. Back to public affairs and kept cargo and sales. So I had an interesting portfolio. I don't know if it was a midlife crisis or what, but I had a point in time where I thought maybe there's something else I should be doing, and should I go experiment or explore that before I get too much older, too further into this career. And so in 2017, I was working in public affairs for Alaska, working directly for Brad. I decided to take a pause, and I went to work for the Catholic Church in Seattle. And
I do remember you leaving.
Yep.
There was an announcement that you were stepping down or stepping away or something. And I'm like, so Joe's leaving us now.
That's right.
Yeah. So you went and worked with the Catholic Church.
And it was a super tough decision. Took my wife and I several weeks to reach it. And but I went to work for the Catholic Church, and it was a public policy position. So it was something I had some experience in, although it was a whole new world working for the church and so forth. But as a cradle Catholic, it was a way for me to sort of give back to the institution that has meant a lot to me throughout my life, and good experience. Missed aviation a lot, and most specifically, I missed Alaska Airlines, and what I really missed was the people of Alaska Airlines. So, about a year and a half after I left, I had another unique opportunity back in Juneau, and everything's full circle in this business. But because I'd stayed close with the original Wings of Alaska group over the years, that business had evolved, and they had gotten out of flying scheduled air service, and they were doing exclusively floatplane flying for the cruise ship customers that come into Juneau. And there was an ownership group in place there that still included Bob Jacobson, but several others. And some of the owners were ready to move on and do something different, and so they were ready to bring in some new owners. And so I was very privileged. My wife and I became part owners of what is now called Wings Airways in Juneau. So I went back up to Juneau, and I spent the summer of 2019 as the CEO of Wings Airways.
Wow.
And then it was towards the end of that summer, and I was wondering, what am I going to do all winter, because it's just a summer-only operation for Wings, that Brad and also Ben Minicucci called and asked if I would come do the Horizon job.
What an incredible journey.
It's mind-blowing. It's just been richly blessed.
Does it feel like it's gone by in a snap of a finger, or does it feel like it's been a long trek for you?
Fast, and as you know, the older you get, the faster, it's like, it's Christmas time already again. things seem to speed up.
Yeah.
But these jobs, they've been busy jobs. And I think that's the other factor. The days go by quick. And
yeah. Did you hesitate at all when they called and asked you to come back, or did you feel like you were ready?
There was no hesitation. I about dropped the phone and I literally pulled the phone out and stared at it because I was not expecting that offer.
Yeah.
And going back to the first part of this conversation, Brendan, like as a kid in high school writing term papers about Horizon Air, and even during all my years with Alaska Airlines, I mean, Horizon's part of the Air Group family, so I got to know people there. I'd become close with Jeff Pinio, their longtime CEO. I knew a lot of the other folks there. Yeah. So I always tried to stay tight with Horizon because I continued to have an affinity for them all these years. So the opportunity to go to that role at her, it was really sort of mind-boggling for me. And I'm still to this day very grateful to Brad and Ben for giving me that opportunity.
Horizon holds a special place.
Yeah, for you as well.
Yeah. Your first airline. I still remember interviewing there with Lamar
Haggard. Yeah. Who's currently number one on seniority, but retires in just a few weeks.
That's right. You get to go to your dream airline.
Yeah.
What was the highlight of that 4-year experience for you?
Got into the role in November of 2019. And less than 3 months after I got in the role, COVID hit. And COVID did what it did to the airline industry, so that was incredibly tough during that period. Then we came out of COVID, and of course, a lot of the major airlines had allowed for big waves of early retirement during the depths of COVID that they now needed to backfill quickly when we came out of COVID in about 2021. So as I think a lot of your listeners and viewers probably know, the regional airlines just got hammered, especially in 2022 when the major airlines were hiring at record levels to backfill those COVID departures. And so every single regional airline, including Horizon, it was an existential crisis. It was like, are we going to survive this? Because we lost so many pilots so fast that we had to take the flying way down. And it was a tough, and this was just coming off of COVID too. People were still sort of getting their feet back under them from that experience when suddenly we were faced with, geez, how are we going to get through this? So to answer your question, like the highlight of that 4 years at Horizon was getting through that tough period. And it was a consummate team effort. We worked closely with a fantastic leadership team at Horizon. We worked closely with the union leaders at Horizon. We worked closely with the Alaska Air Group leaders. We made the decision in conjunction with the Alaska board to get out of the Q400. We figured if we're going to be way down in terms of the amount of flying we could do, this is probably the right time to make the transition to a single fleet type, knowing that a single fleet type would strengthen Horizon better for the future. But that was a tough pill to swallow for a lot of folks. You know, we had 32 Q400s, and when we made the announcement that we were going to get out of those airplanes, that was half our fleet at that point.
Yeah.
People thought, how do we sustain losing half our fleet?
Right.
Well, again, Alaska supported Horizon. We went out and ordered a bunch more E-175s. We managed the pilot staffing situation as tightly and as carefully as we could. We had fantastic support from some amazing Horizon pilots. Perry Salmonson, that you recently interviewed, was
awesome guy, right?
Was a charismatic leader throughout that whole period and a tremendous support for me. It's just a tremendous group of people, and they've owned it, and they've made that place better, and I'm honored to have been a part of it.
You know, what's funny is we talk about how small of a world aviation is. I went to flight school with Eric Bra.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Wow.
And Horizon is one of those places where pilots go and stay.
Yeah, Eric Bra is the system chief pilot for Horizon now. He's been in that role for 3 or 4 years. Yeah. And
it's funny you were talking about this whole, the whole pilot thing, because from a pilot's perspective, that was an amazing time, right? It's like, everyone's hiring, and you just never quite, like, one action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Yeah, the pilots thought they'd died and gone to heaven.
Yeah.
They were flight instructing for maybe 6 months, then going into the right seat of an E-175, and then a lot of times they were getting hired from the right seat of an E-175 to the right seat of a 737 or something even bigger in less than a year. And so it was truly unprecedented. But from a pilot standpoint, it was obviously a very good time to be an airline pilot. In fact, I used to tell people it's the best time in history to be an airline pilot.
Yeah. So after your 4 years there, are you thinking maybe you're going to step away from aviation? Are you thinking this is kind of a good time?
Yeah, in early 2023, I was starting to think that 4 years might be about right at Horizon. We were already starting to see the trajectory turn up, and I knew we were going to be in a good place. We had a great leadership team there. We had Jason Berry sort of coming in to be my successor, and so I had told Ben Minicucci that I would probably retire at the end of 23. Then it was during 2023 that we started talking about this idea of Alaska Air Group bringing Hawaiian Airlines into the family. And so, Ben's been a terrific colleague and boss for me for the last few years. And he said, why don't you think about doing something with Hawaiian Airlines instead and maybe stick around for a while? And I will tell you, one thing led to another, and here I am. But the what really was the trigger there was recognizing that this combination between Alaska and Hawaiian really was going to be a huge game changer for both airlines, but would set up Alaska Air Group in a very special way for the next generation. And to be a part of that, to have an opportunity to play sort of a key role in bringing the two together, I just thought, I was sort of thinking I was ready to retire and maybe try some other things, but when that opportunity presented itself, the chance to help influence how the company is going to look a generation from now, I thought I got to stick around and be a part of this team. Yeah. So that's what led to now.
It's kind of like when I sent you that message and I said, I think that this is going to be, people will look back on this moment in time, right, where these two airlines are coming together, and at some point we'll all be gone, but this is the history that's being made now.
It's a huge moment in time.
Do you feel that pressure with a lot of other people depending on you during a time of uncertainty?
You feel the sense of responsibility, I think, that you're talking about. Yeah. The kuleana in the native Hawaiian language. I certainly feel it. You try and manage it. You don't want it to get so big in your head, just like when you're flying the airplane. You don't want to be so focused on the 180 lives behind you that it takes your focus away from executing on your job. And that's sort of how it is here. And just like, when you're flying in the left seat of a 737, you've got a crew that's there to support you. And not just on the airplane, but the dispatcher back in the ops center and so forth. And same thing here. It isn't one person that's doing this. It's a total team effort. But for me, I try and be as inclusive as possible with the team. I do rely on my faith a lot. I think that's, at least for me, pretty important to help me stay centered and focused on the right things. And the right things in terms of the workplace, it's really to focus on the people and to be present to them, to be as understanding as possible. The folks at Hawaiian Airlines they're consummate aviation professionals, very, very sharp group of people here. They know how to run an airline. They're also incredibly gracious. They're so filled with aloha. They have made me feel welcome, and yet it is a time of change for people that have been here at Hawaiian Airlines for a long time. And change can be unsettling for people, and so there is I hope I'm doing a good enough job, but I want to make sure I'm connecting with people that might be feeling discomfort with the change, give them a sense of how I believe very hopefully that the future will play out. And there's incredible pride in Hawaiian Airlines, the history of this place, the culture, the brand, and letting folks know that Alaska has many of those same elements. And that's why this is a beautiful combination. I think the best possible combination of two airlines because of the similarities in history and culture. And frankly, the similarity in the sense of purpose. And at the end of the day, I think for an airline, that's what you want to help try and keep people focused on, is that sense of purpose. And I don't know, maybe every airline can claim one, but what I learned from my time up in the state of Alaska, that no airline has a stronger sense of purpose than Alaska Airlines does, bringing, diapers and medicine to a place like Kotzebue, or bringing, a mom in from Nome to have her baby in Anchorage. I mean, that's serious responsibility. And I thought nobody could ever match that sense of purpose that Alaska Airlines has. But I was wrong. Hawaiian Airlines also has that same sense of purpose, and it really is linked to flying between the neighbor islands here in Hawaii and sort of serving as that lifeline, just as we do Alaska has in the state of Alaska, and that both airlines have played that role with that sense of purpose for over 9 decades. It's remarkable, and so to the degree it's stressful or tired or whatever, it's wind in the sails most days because of the work that we're doing.
How has your wife supported you throughout your various moves, And because here we are at another one, right?
Here's the most important way Jen has supported me. Her dad was an Air Force pilot. He flew, among other things, KC-135s and had a tremendous career as an Air Force pilot. Won the Distinguished Flying Cross. I mean, a lot of really cool stuff. So Jen grew up with a dad who was a big jet pilot, And so when Jen and I first met, I was flying the Learjet for Geico. And a friend from college introduced us. We actually went on a blind date. And when he was telling her about me, he was sort of hyping the fact that he's a jet pilot, thinking that was going to be the thing that would get her interested. She seemed sort of unimpressed by that, and because she was, it's like her dad flown jets. It wasn't that big a deal to her. That's been key. Jen, in a beautiful, supporting, encouraging way, has always sort of kept me humble. And I think for you to be an effective leader in roles like this one, you better stay humble, or the business will humble you. But Jen was never too impressed with me being a jet pilot. She was never that impressed with what title I had. She just wanted a good husband and a good dad, and I've tried to do that too. But she's kept me humble, and that's been one of the greatest gifts she could have done for me.
What do you do when you get that phone call now, and it's that really bad news or that really challenging news?
That happens sometimes. Our airlines have tremendous people running them. Sometimes things don't go perfect. I just try and stay calm in the moment. And there's almost always more information that needs to come out when the first sort of update on something doesn't usually tell the whole story. And so you got to be a little patient to get more information, get the whole story. And then, quick prayer, a little reliance on faith in those moments is important too.
Yeah. I want to show you a picture here, and I'll put it up on the screen for everyone.
Yeah.
What was his dream?
I do have a lot of pride in the fact that I was able to be a part of the team at Horizon Air years later and get through some interesting times. So I don't know, for folks watching, the caption there says, and my wife wrote that in front of his dream company, it's good to have dreams, and they don't come true automatically. You got to work for them. You got to be patient. You got to be smart. But dreams do come true, and this has been an amazing career. It's really been a dream come true in a lot of different ways.
Well, thank you, Joe, so much for taking the time to sit down and to share your story with our audience. I appreciate you and
Brendan,
and all of the time that you've spent.
Yeah, thanks. Happy New Year to everybody, and thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. And for everyone listening, thank you. We'll see you next time.